Hello, and thank you for listening to and watching the Salty Witches podcast. Obviously, we're your hosts. We're back here with your bi weekly episode. We're going to start with a listener question, and then we're going to head into tonight's episode with Baphomet. We got a listener question about Baphomet.
Yep,
And
a few weeks ago, yeah.
A few weeks ago. And so I'll let Mike kind of hand that over and get that taken care of. Mike has a lot of really good information on Baphomet, and I'll chime in as per usual. But to start, we're going to answer this listener question. So we got this listener question on June 4th. So hopefully you're listening. Hopefully you'll get this and hopefully you'll get it in time. Hello, Mike and Austin. I'll get right to it. I love it. Short, simple, and to the point. Salt and cooking spells. If salt is needed purely for seasoning, how do I properly use it? I recall Austin talking about exercising the spirit of salt so that it doesn't have the neutralizing effect. That sounds intimidating. Is it something a novice can do alone? Or should I just accept that some broths slash soups, etc., are going to be bland? Okay. So when you're doing cooking magic, it kind of differs. Salt is in a lot of kitchen witchery is seen as prosperity because when your family when your family had salt and it made the food taste better and helped with preservation of the food, that's prosperity. That was seen as financial abundance. Like you had the ability to do that. It does neutralize and it does create a boundary of protection, right? Now, the reason that I just don't go heavy on salt in pretty much any spell is because it's pretty aggressive. Like it's one of those spirits that's just like, this is what I do. This is what I do. And so as long as you can make it work in tandem with things, remember when we're looking at kitchen witchery, most of the time the kitchen witches focus is going to be around healing and protection of the house, hearth, home, the individuals who are in the home. And so because of that, it's safe to say that using salt in kitchen witchery is pretty normal. When I'm actually planning on doing kitchen witchery, I'll use salt to wash my hands. So that way my energy is grounded. And then when I do add salt, I focus that salt and basically tell it, instead of neutralizing everything I'm putting in here, I need you to ground the energy and the other magical focuses into who is consuming this. I need this to become made manifest in this physical, mundane reality. Now, if you wanted to exercise the spirit of salt, that is most definitely something you can do. I know that it sounds intimidating, but it's one of the first things you learn when you're doing a lot of ceremonial magic or particularly Wicca. And it's easy to do this. You can find ways to do this online. You can go the old Catholic route and you can literally look up exorcism rite of salt and it should pull all that up. You could also just utilize your own focus and your own intention. And as you do that, you'll hover your hand over the salt. You'll usually draw a banishing pentagram. Okay.
Did you say banishing?
Banishing.
Oh.
I probably did say banishing.
Like, but what is banishing?
But banishing pentagram. There are two styles of pentagrams, basically. Okay, in ceremonial magic. There's more than that. But like just looking at the use of invoking and banishing, the banishing starts at the top. You go down to your left, back up to your right, back to your left, down again to your right, back up to the top, and then back down. Okay, to complete it. Invoking is top, right, up to the left, back to the right, down to the left, up to the top, back down to the right. Okay, you can find all these online. There's invoking pentagrams and stuff for all the elements and other particular things. But if you're just using it to exercise the spirit of salt, a simple banishment pentagram, and then simply a simple exorcism incantation. One that I was taught was I exorcise thee, O creature of salt, beest thou a creature of earth. I cast out from thee all impurities and uncleanness of this world and the world of phantasm. Beest thou made pure under my will in the name of so mote it be. You know, super easy things like that. So don't be intimidated by it, but also you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Just have a conversation with the salt as you're putting it in. Like, don't nullify my magic, please. Just make it ground into the physical. All right, super straightforward. Now, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered that really well. I think I would say they're talking about magical cooking, right?
Yes.
Incorporating spell work into their cooking.
Yeah, kitchen witchery is what I'm
Okay,
getting.
so I would say that after doing that, it would maybe be a good idea based on the other spell work that you're putting into that recipe, that cooking, to try to consecrate that salt maybe to new purpose.
Yes.
Give it like a new
Yeah, thank you for catching that.
direction.
Yeah, thank you for catching that. I forgot that. You do want to give it a new direction. So once you've done that, then you can actually do the invoking pinnacle or pentagram over it. And then you will say, I charge thee to be a creature of, for the purpose of, so it is, in the names of, so it is. Okay. So it really is pretty simple, but also you don't need to worry about it. If you're putting in like a pinch of salt, that's not that much salt, you know? So pinch of salt, talk to it. This is your job. This is what I need you to do. Don't do anything else. Work with me instead of against me. Boom, you know, Emerald Lagasse that into your soup. Bam. Second question. I have a friend who is 100% new age / light worker nut. I take everything she tells me with a grain of salt, but I'm wondering if there is a kernel of truth to some of the shit she says. Bear with me.
I'm buried.
She does energy work, and the things she describes seeing are very fantasy animal based. For example, she claims to have seen a giant mutant scorpion attached to a man's back, which was depleting his energy, and somehow this scorpion was a manifestation of his toxic relationship. Or she says she sees worms / leeches sucking on different areas of someone's body. I know that Mike has talked about how he sees auras and the differences in aura depending on stagnant energy, etc. So, is what she's claiming to see just a different way of seeing / sensing energy? I'm going to say yes. Some of those things do seem a little fantastical, but that's not necessarily wrong. You know, however you're perceiving those things, it's just a matter of not approaching it with fear, approaching it with an understanding that these are symbols, these are symbolic representations, and how you're interpreting them and internalizing them, and then what you would do with them. You know, if I were to see leeches on someone's body in an auric sense or an energetic sense, then that personally to me would tell me they have multiple spirit attachments probably that are minor, and what is happening is this little parasite has just latched on and has found a readily available source of food. Depending on where it's at in their aura, can tell me what specifically it is mirrored to attach to. So if it's like in their heart or like around their heart center, and that tells me it probably has something to do with their expression and how they intake information. And that usually would be a sign to me that someone has like rejection issues or something like that. If it's attached to their head, it's someone who usually has anxiety that is really in their head a lot, so on and so forth. You know, mutant scorpion, I'd be like, weird. I would usually probably take that as like a shadow totem.
I think it would vary. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you because yes, I think that.
But it does vary.
I think that totemics and animistic spirits.
It's a high allergy day here in Utah. Sorry.
I think that animistic spirits can take on many forms.
Yes.
But I can relate to what this Saltine is talking about here, because when I see like illness, particularly illness that originates in spirit, in the spiritual realm, when I see that on people or in people energetically, to me that very often takes the shape of a spider.
Okay.
You know, which is not to say anything bad about spiders. I love spiders. But to me, that's a sign of an attachment. I think that the association, the mental association of spiders being predatory, for one, but also with the association of web, how they tend to ensnare their prey, a lot of them. Like, to me, I think that it's a logical association to spider and how it can appear as an attachment in the energy fields of particular people that are in need of healing. So I totally get this visual.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to make sure that we're not having a fear response to something like that when we see it. You know, you brought up the fact that this could actually be just animistic spirit representation or something like that, and that is also likely with something like this, it may not be a negative thing.
Yeah.
But if it is behaving, or if you can see based on how it's attached to the person's field, like spirit and energy field, that it is parasitic in nature, then yeah, typically you need to do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking about spiders now because of the association with Taranatha.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say, oh,
yeah,
interesting.
but that's something that pops up in Romani folk magic as well. Which is again not to disrespect the animistic spirit of spider, but I think most of us, while we respect spiders, we also don't necessarily want that kind of spirit hanging around all the time.
Yeah.
Poisonous.
Some of them. Well, all of them. But
so yeah, so no, I think this is yeah, I think that their friend has some skill.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my intuitive feeling is their friend is responding with a little, they're reading this or they're interpreting this through a lens of fear.
Yeah, fear or like a savior complex.
And you got to be really careful about that.
Yeah. So again, with the animal visions, she has mentioned how a spider shows up in her house to give her a sign, not a physically real spider, or that she sensed a snake circling around her, giving her a message, or that various animals showed up to her energy work sessions. Is this how some spirits or guides show up to people? I'm going to say sometimes. I have particular animistic or totemic situations that pop up that do kind of give me those little things, if that makes sense. So normally if I'm seeing normally for me, like if I see black cats or movements out of the corner of my eye that are feline in nature, that usually to me is like trickster energy, or that something is skulking about. I've also had totemic energies and spirits that I'm associated with, that I have made like spiritual connections with and pacts with, approach me. One of them is actually serpent and will actually come to me and relay information. So I'm going to say yeah for some people, but again, I think sometimes, and this is again no hate, no shade to light workers or new age practitioners. Everyone starts somewhere, and some people really find where they grow in that situation. I find that most people who are in that situation though really take that, and it's almost like they let their ego run with it. And instead of having a healthy ego check where it's like, okay, so how can I like, meander or navigate my way through this? Instead, what we see is this huge ego that manifests, and it borderline spiritual psychosis. I've had several people several times like, the spider came to me and told me it was going to drag me to hell. And I'm like, okay, are you sure that just wasn't like a weird thing?
It could have been a weird thing.
Could have been a weird thing or something like that. So it's always a good thing to just kind of like check, the influence that a past life has on the present. Many current physical ailments or behavioral issues are blamed on a past life or a generational curse. How often can a medical condition, say asthma, or problematic behavior, be legitimately traced back to a past life? Like with most of her stuff, I think she's spiritually bypassing, but I would love to hear your opinions on it. So I'm in both realms with this. I think that past lives stay in the past. They're in the past for a reason. But I also know that some things in a past life do have the ability to affect us in the current life, which is a lot of the times why people come like that should be your purpose for a past life reading. Your purpose for a past life reading should be, what lessons am I failing to learn or struggling to learn in this life that are directly correlated cyclically to a past life, you know? So with past lives, I do think that, I have met several people who have asthma, and like in one of their past lives, they were either suffocated to death, they drowned, or they like were burned, like they burned alive. And so I think that's a really cool association, but I also don't think that blaming that past life and then acknowledging that past life and doing past life healing work is going to fix that, because it's already solidified in the physical human body. And what you need to learn to do is to work through that struggle to get past it and actually empower yourself. I think that could be said for a lot of chronic conditions, but Also, sometimes you just win the genetic lottery jackpot and things are just fucky, you know? Um, so I don't disagree with that idea or terminology, but I also don't necessarily subscribe 100% that that is the root of all things. Just like generational curses, a generational curse is negated by the work you're doing presently. And if you're doing the work presently to actually allow yourself to heal, and if the generational curse in your family is alcoholism brought on by abuse, don't drink alcohol and do all you can to get into anger management classes and stuff like that to make sure that you are not becoming that person. You are not becoming the abuser. And that's going to help negate that. Now, there are special extenuating circumstances where you are doing the work, but for some reason, it's really hard for you to maintain it because it just keeps coming back. And that's when, if you have found yourself in a situation at a client like this, they listen to the podcast. Hi. Um, I've had a client who had this and they were doing the work. They were doing legitimately good work, therapy, anger management, working on their shit. And they contacted me and I worked with them and they basically were like, I told them, like, you are under the effect of a generational curse. And here's what you can do on a magical level to assist the mundane efforts you're doing to break it and not let it take root again. And it was a long drawn out process. It's not sitting and having someone drum and letting you cry. It's a long drawn out process because it's usually generations back and it has to be done per generation.
And there's a lot of follow up and homework.
Yes, a lot of follow up and homework. The amount of times my client contacted me and they were like, I'm struggling, I feel like I'm backsliding. That's why working with someone who's ethical is really important, because I went and I would go, okay, well, let's sit, I'll do some Reiki for you, and focus on this just to help give you a little bit of that energy, or let this energy break up that block that you seem to be getting hung up on, so that way you can move forward more effectively. So my answer to all those questions is yes and no, but also yes.
Sir. Okay. Um, I don't think to add to that.
Okay, cool. So thank you, Saltine, for that lovely question. Again, always send your questions in. We love to hear them. We know that we are only doing these, every couple weeks, but we're still trying to put out as much information as possible. Okay, so Mike, let's head on over to you for the Baphomet information dump.
The information dump.
Information dump.
I don't like that dump in there. Can we not take a dump?
Baphomet information download.
Ew. No, I prefer a dump.
Gnosis.
Thank you. No, this isn't getting any better. Although it's interesting that you go with Gnosis, but that you bring that up, because that Baphomet has much to do with Gnosis. So we had a Saltine a few weeks back contact us who was inquiring about some information on Baphomet, because it is hard to find information on Baphomet, and there are a couple of really unfortunate reasons for that. I teach a class on Baphomet, and so I thought this would actually just be a good time maybe to share some of the information that comes up in that class. So Baphomet. I wanted to start really by talking a little bit about who Baphomet is not. Okay, and I want to make it very clear, Baphomet, though the likeness of Baphomet has been bastardized and used by the Satanic Temple. Is it the Satanic Temple or the Church of Satan? It's the Satanic Temple.
And the Church of Satan. They all use them. The only difference is one of them actually acknowledges the true roots, while the other one acknowledges other things.
Yeah. So anyway, but Baphomet is not. It should never be the representation of Satan or anything that we associate with satanic kinds of imagery as popularized by Christianity, the Satanic Temple, and other occult orders. Baphomet is not the Sabbatic goat or the goat of Mendes, created by Eliphas Levi. And while Baphomet is a horned spirit, certainly, okay, Baphomet is not Pan, Cernunnos, or Lucifer. Okay, we know that Baphomet is not similar or can really not be comparable to other horned gods because other horned gods almost always have a decidedly masculine aspect. I can't think of gods that would really embody more of a traditionally masculine energy than like Pan, Cernunnos, even Lucifer, who tends to be kind of a little queer, like queer non-binary, kind of in the way that he pops up. He still is decidedly masculine.
Yes.
And at least based on more traditional associations, right? What we think of traditionally when we hear masculine, right? So I think that the source of confusion there around like other horned gods, I think, really primarily comes down to the fact that Baphomet, like some of those other horned gods, has a lot to do with processes of personal gnosis in relation to spiritual evolution. So there is some overlap there, certainly. Okay, but these are not all one spirit. Okay, and it is unfair for us to do that to these gods. We need to acknowledge and honor them as separate beings, as separate intelligences. We do them a disservice when we syncretize them, I think, a lot of the time. Okay, syncretization is not a good thing. Okay, so Baphomet's worship originated really like a really long time ago in what is now the Middle East and in the Mediterranean area of the world. Many gods, like many other gods in the old world, Baphomet's real name has been lost. Baphomet, much like other deities that we've discussed on the podcast, Hecate, a few others, the deity identifier that we identify as Baphomet today, that name, Baphomet, it is better to associate that or to think of that as a title or as an honorific rather than the actual name of a deity. Okay, so do remember that. Okay, nothing wrong with referring to them as Baphomet, right? But that the true name or the true names, more likely names of this spirit, like many deities, those are long gone, lost to time. Okay, and unfortunately, the influences of the Christian church. Baphomet was a title given to, I think, a few different spiritual figures, and it's interesting because when we talk about spiritual figures, I'm not just talking about other deities. One of the most interesting things historically that pops up when you go to research Baphomet is that Baphomet as a title was actually something that was attributed to humans. Most popularly, Muhammad, the saint that we see being kind of one of the founding figures of Islam, of the Islamic faith. Muhammad was referred to as the Baphomet by Templars. I lost the word for it. By Templars, the Templar movement, the Crusade Knights, when they moved throughout the Middle East, and they got there and they found cults of worship, not popular cults of worship necessarily, but they found cults of worship around what we identify today as Islamic faith in that area of the world. That we understand that Baphomet was something that was used as a title for Muhammad and for, I think, a few other figures that were like relatively well known within kind of those smaller sects of worship, many of which had really very little to do with what we identify as Islam today. But that was a way that I think the Templar Knights were able to identify, or that was the label that they needed to place on, like, oh, these are the evil non-believers that we are here to either convert or kill. Most often kill. And there's a record of this actually happening, or that exists in, I believe it was 1098 Common Era, 1098 CE. There actually were documents found. They were believed to be the recordings of a Templar knight who was known as Anselm of Riebmont. And he wrote in what I believe would be like, I want to say like a personal diary, but also there's conjecture or theory that he was of a position within the Crusade Knights, the Templar Knights of the Crusades. He was also documenting these things not only for personal relevance, but also he was in communication with other people, and reporting on the activities of the native people that they were coming across within that area of the Middle East. He was of course writing back home like, oh, there's this figure here, cult leader, and Baphomet was one of the terms that was utilized to describe or to name these people. A lot of the information that we have on Baphomet is really, to be honest, is credited to scholars of the Catholic Church. And that gets really tricky because historically, if you look at many of the alternative spiritual movements that we would identify as occultism, as paganism, right? Very often the records that we have of these practices are really come down to the information made available from monks, priests, other figures within the structure of Catholicism, primarily. And again, that's tricky because we know that by their very nature that these were not people that were likely to be kind or charitable to the beliefs of other people, right? Any organized religion that was not Catholicism would still have been classified as a paganistic, evil kind of a thing, right? Or at the very least, uninformed and ignorant kind of belief, right? So the information that we have of Baphomet is again, it's tricky for that reason. And for those of you who are interested in maybe connecting with Baphomet a bit more, I want to encourage you to look at your work with Baphomet as really a fairly reconstructionist kind of a spiritual practice. And there's nothing wrong with reconstructionism, right? As long as we're honest about what that is, okay? And that it is indeed reconstructionism, right? That's a huge thing that pops up in pretty much every spiritual practice out there, and every culture of the world that has paganistic practices. An element of all of that is reconstructionism, and we do ourselves a disservice. We do our practice a disservice. We dishonor our gods. Beyond that, we just look really fucking stupid when we refuse to acknowledge that, yes, this is indeed a reconstructionist path. Okay, we need to just accept and move forward. Okay, we need to be kind of skeptical about some of those things. Okay, because obviously the church is only providing information that's going to fit their agenda, right? So we know worship at Baphomet was happening prior to the arrival of the Templars and the Holy Knights associated with the Crusade. We know that worship at Baphomet was happening prior, because it was common enough and influential enough that to just be clear, again, not super common, but common enough, people were aware enough, and it was influential enough that there are records of Templar Knights converting. Many people believe that Templar Knights were all there in service to the church, and they were all there, it was about their faith. But many of those knights were not devout Catholics. Many of those knights were not there because it was about their religious belief, or faith. They were there because that's what they had to do. They were knights. This was their job. Or they were maybe men of privilege, and it became clear to them through their other political involvement and connections that by going and doing this, that they had the potential maybe to increase their own personal wealth, because that happens a lot. There are always people, historically, there have always been people who have been willing to profit off of war, right? They're running our country right now in the good old US of fucking A, right? So we know that that's also likely a thing. So what happened, I think, a lot of the times is these knights, they would get over there, and either because they maybe were lacking in faith, maybe through some process of conversion, personal epiphany, gnosis, whatever you want to call it, many of them found themselves actually leaving Christianity and stepping into the worship or the spiritual belief of this other occult set, Baphomaic faith or practice or belief. So a lot of that was motivation. I also think a lot of motivation in some of the Templars that were known to have converted or believed to have converted, is they could see the economic and the political power of those connections, as again, historically, as is almost often the case, occult circles, communities, sects, cults, whatever you want to call them. Very often, these are organizations that are filled with very powerful, wealthy, and influential people, right? We know that is certainly the case. I mean, perfect example, the Freemasons, right? A lot of very wealthy, very, very, very powerful, politically powerful men were and are involved in the Freemason community or group, right? So that would have been likely the case here as well, as men who were maybe, looking to increase their worldly power, they would have been inclined to join these groups because it was politically and financially expedient to do so. But we know that a lot of Templars were practicing worship of Baphomet as some sort of divine intelligence or being. Um, Yes, and that for that to be the case, there had to have been structured and organized cults and sects of worship prior to the arrival of those Templar Knights. Um, Texts coming from the archives of the Catholic Church tell us that Templars were being corrupted by the cult of Baphomet, and there are disputed records of information coming from the vaults of the Vatican, and it's always the vaults of the Vatican, right?
Vaults of the Vatican.
All of the world's secrets, even like the Roswell crash, right? The UFO, all of it's locked away in the vaults of the Vatican somewhere, right? I'm joking, but I wouldn't be surprised. But we have recordings, or we have there is evidence to show that through communication, messages being sent back to Rome, back to the church authorities, the leaders of the church, by Templar Knights, by spies, by soldiers, by people who are working for the church in other areas of the world, particularly around the Middle East here. We know that there were reports coming in saying, like, oh my God, there are Templar Knights who are converting. There are Templar Knights now worshiping these pagan gods. There are Templar Knights now worshiping Baphomet, right? So it was a thing. It's believed that Baphomet's presence actually became common enough among the Templars, and that was, or became fairly common, I should say, among the Templars, and that is one of the justifications that the papal authorities ultimately used to denounce the Templars. And there's a lot of weird history around this, and forgive me, I mean, I'm not a historian, right? Somebody else out there that actually is a historian would probably have a full picture of this, but we do know from a lot of stories that over time, that the church removed its the Catholic Church began to, after many years, began to distance itself from the military force that we identify as the Templar Knights. That at one point the Templar Knights were there, they were doing the work of the church, they were going out a holy war, crusade, right, to pass the power and the whatever of the church, right, the authority of the church to all the non-believers, right. But over time, as the Templar Knights, as their movement, as the military, as they grew in power themselves as an organization, we do see eventually that the Catholic Church got to a point where the Templar Knights fell out of favor with the papal authority. And there were many knights that were actually like denounced, like high-ranking knights, and and the church basically was like, nope. And really, we know what happened there, right? Is the church saw a threat to its own power, right? And so there were many justifications made by the church for why the Templar Knights were now untrustworthy, why they were no longer in working under the auspices of the Catholic Church, that they were no longer believers in Christ, right? And we know that reports of many Templars converting to Baphometic faith or Baphometic worship, that was a component, that was one of the justifications used by the church, is that the Templar Knights, many of them had lost their way and were now worshiping pagan gods. So another bit of evidence there, another thing to kind of support just the history and the legitimacy of Baphometic practice. Okay, let's see. There's a good amount of information out there about Baphomet. If you go looking, if you do kind of like an internet deep dive. The problem with a lot of the information out there is that it, as I previously mentioned, has been corrupted by the agendas of the Christian Church, Catholicism primarily. So we have this fucked up spin on Baphomet and the history of their worship and who they are as a spirit, coming from Christianity primarily. But we also see really messed up influences and strange changes made to Baphomet done by like organizations like the Golden Dawn. I mentioned Eliphas Levi several moments back, and they're reimagining Baphomet as a spirit, right? But we also see um, a lot of issues with the recognition and the information around Baphomet out there now. There's a lot of problem around that as well, because outside of Christianity, all that we really see primarily are edgelord occultists, and left-hand path practitioners. Like, what the fuck does that even mean anymore? What the fuck? Isn't everybody a left-hand path practitioner now? If you look at what that really means, right? So you see these kinds of personalities, figures like E.A. Coeting, God fucking bid, right? Like you see these kinds of figures out there now, like modern day wannabe Crowley figures, right? Who are pushing a lot of like left-hand path, satanic, uh, goetic kinds of ideas and philosophies around Baphomet, but Baphomet originally had nothing to do with any of that shit, or very little, I should say. Right. So the resources that you're going to find out there are really primarily being brought to you through the lens of Christianity, which we know is going to be fucked up and wrong, and ego-driven edgelord armchair occultists, who we also know are fucked up and wrong a lot of the time. Right? So I don't recommend books. I'm sitting here right now and I cannot think of a book or a particular teacher or figure that I would be like, oh yeah, you can trust what this person tells you on Baphomet. I'm sure they are out there, but I am not familiar with that. Everybody that I see talking about Baphomet is all about, like, oh, he's Satan. It's like, nope, no,
ooh, dark, spooky, scary.
no. And it's very unfortunate because they have taken an amazing intelligence, an amazing spirit, and they have reduced this being that was all encompassing in some sense, and a very powerful figure for illumination, spiritual illumination, mental illumination, personal gnosis, spiritual awakening and enlightenment. And they have reduced this spirit down to he evil, he bad, it's the devil, right? Really fucked up. Really fucked up, right? Okay, so I want you to be really skeptical of those things. Okay, I want you to be really careful about where you're learning and where you're looking for other resources. Okay,
just be super skeptical, especially of E.A. Coeting.
I also want to say, I really didn't want to get into like a crapping on E.A. Coeting thing, because I think that E.A. Coeting to me is a perfect example of someone who moves into the occult sphere, I think, with kind of the right motivations to begin with, but becomes a victim of their own mental illness, and really through the process, really negative ego manifestation. And I feel badly for criticizing E.A. Coeting, because I really do feel that a lot of the challenges that he has faced over the years, and a lot of the things that he's claimed over the years, so much of that really is primarily rooted in mental illness. And there's no judgment there for being mentally ill, because fuck, everybody is now, right? So I don't know. So yeah, so I don't want to crap on E.A. Coeting any more than I already have. I feel right saying that he's an edgelord armchair occultist, because that's been my experience and what I've seen of his work. But poor guy. Anyway, so just be careful about where you're learning and where you're looking for resources. One of the other reasons that I want to go back to, and I'm going to revisit what I mentioned kind of at the beginning of this, is modern contemporary work with Baphomet practice, as it is a reconstructionist kind of a thing. It, to be honest, really does you very little good to go out and to look for a lot of resources and history on the practices of that worship, because even if you could find a reliable source, you're not going to be able to recreate those practices. You are not in your living room going to be able to build the elaborate altar that you need to make sacrifices and honor this spirit in the way that they would have been honored millennia ago, right? You're not going to find the items that you need unless you are lucky enough to live in the Middle East, right? And I know we can get everything we need on Amazon now, right? But there are things utilized in some of these practices that go back centuries. There are plants, there are ingredients, there are whatever tools. there a lot of this shit doesn't even exist anymore because we have wiped out species of animal. We have made particular types of plants extinct, right? These things just don't exist. The recipes for particular types of incense that would have been traditional are long gone, right? Like, so it does you no good to go back and try to research these things to try to recreate this. And to be honest, if you are familiar enough, if you learn just a few of the basics around the philosophy and the belief of what Baphomet is and represents, that right there tells you that you don't need to go back and recreate all that shit. In fact, you shouldn't be trying to do that because your experience of Baphomet and the way that you incorporate them into your own spiritual work is based entirely upon your personal gnosis of them as a being and what they are bringing to you in your practice. Okay, your work as a Baphomaic practitioner is going to be very different than mine, and it should be. Right? So don't go back and try to reinvent the wheel. Don't go back and try to reclaim those things because who knows if any of that shit is even real? One, two, you really get logistically you can't. Yeah, so I want to move on from there, and I want to make it clear that Baphomet it would be better in talking about Baphomet, and I've probably done our Saltines a disservice because so far on this episode I've referred to Baphomet repeatedly as a deity, but I want to make it very clear that Baphomet really would originally not have been identified as a god, that it would have been more accurate or is more accurate to identify Baphomet as something more within the realm of a demigod. Or, and this is going to be a little maybe woo-woo for some people, but or an avatar in the sense that Baphomet is an intelligence, a conscious force of, I'm trying to figure out how to put this into words without, again, sounding like too fucking weird and abstract. An intelligence, an individual intelligence, a consciousness of its own, right? But a consciousness of universal enlightenment. So with that,
The egregore of gnosis.
Yes, one egregore of gnosis would be one way to put that. But I kind of struggle with that a little bit because egregores very often are things that we create. And Baphomet is indeed a separate intelligence, like a live in their own life, doing their own thing for a very long time, kind of an intelligence. So those of you who are interested in working with Baphomet, I want to encourage you, do not fall into patterns in your Baphomaic practice that involve worshiping Baphomet. That is a waste of your time. And that is something that Baphomet themselves would not want. Instead, if there's anything you need to be worshiping, you need to be worshiping what Baphomet represents. You need to be worshiping enlightenment. You need to be worshiping awareness. You need to be worshiping responsibility and accountability for your power. You need to be worshiping intelligence and compassion, because Baphomet is definitely a kind and compassionate kind of a spirit. Okay? They would have to be when you look at what they represent. These are the things you need to be focusing on in your practice. And as we have said before on the podcast, when talking about other deities, other intelligences, other spirits, one of the best ways to acknowledge and to bring a sense of worship to your work with Baphomet is to embody those things that Baphomet also embodies, right? Be kind, be smart, place value on knowledge and the power behind learning and being curious about your life, other people, the world, right? Just keep that in mind, okay? All right, let's see. All right, so a few other interesting things, okay? In a more modern context, it is, I think it's always acceptable to refer to Baphomet as with he, him pronouns. I say that mainly because historically, that would have indeed been the case. Baphomet would have been a he, him kind of an association, or a kind of a representation of what we would more commonly see with divine masculine kinds of energies, right? In a more modern context, I think that it is also perfectly acceptable to identify Baphomet with they, them pronouns. They have a very non-binary kind of an energy to them, which is interesting if you think about what that means, because while there are many people out there now running around with like the whole non-binary thing, right? Which, great. If that's how they want to live their lives, wonderful, right? We accept that, right? If you're non-binary, great, right? Wonderful. Okay. But I think that when we look at how that moves into the realm of spirit, I think that there is sometimes a very simplistic view of what that really means. To be non-binary in the context of something like spirit or Baphomet, to be non-binary does not mean that you do not fit into either duality that we would associate with masculine and feminine. It's not about being neither of the extremes. To be non-binary in a spiritual sense means that you take the extremes and you realize that that duality isn't real, that the masculine is in the feminine and the feminine is in the masculine, right? And that those things are all, it's one complete, it's one whole kind of a thing, right? So in a spiritual sense, we can't really see extremes as it might relate to things like masculine, feminine, God, goddess, right? Because those things are all connected. They all really encompass it and are of each other. Okay, but for the sake of conversation, for the sake of being politically correct these days, it is acceptable to refer to Baphomet with they, them pronouns. Okay, let's see. Let me read this real quick. Oh, I lost my place in my notes. Baphomet is beyond discussions around masculine, feminine, non-binary. Baphomet is one of the primal physical forces of creation. Baphomet represents both light and dark, hot and cold, etc. Baphomet is all about the illusion of extreme, or the illusion of duality, and how it really is just that it is an illusion, that there really is no duality. I think we've talked about this in the podcast before as well, but the only duality that really exists in our universe, the only duality that exists at all, is the duality of creation and destruction. That's it. Everything else is just the illusion of separateness or difference. And Baphomet represents the extremes, but also the extremes fully realized being brought back together, which is also one of the achievements that we see when we attain higher or deeper levels of enlightenment as beings, right? To be fully enlightened, we must get to a point where we are able to completely step away from separateness, which is why I love when like little light workers come into the shop, where we've had talks with people in the past who are like wannabe guru kinds of personalities, and they come at you with the like, well, I'm so enlightened, me, but everything in their language and their demeanor is obviously creating separation, right? Because it's all about how wonderful they are, and how much more work you have to do before you'll get to my level, and how you couldn't possibly understand the things I do because you're not as enlightened as I, right? And they're speaking the language of separation through the words that they speak.
Yep.
And if you are a truly enlightened being, you will understand that there is no separation. We're all one consciousness. Okay? One consciousness having many different lived experiences. So
to say you are enlightened is to prove you are not.
Exactly, yes, because if you're a truly enlightened person, you're not running around advertising how enlightened you are. God, all these fucking wannabe gurus and cult leaders these days, it's ridiculous. It's like every metaphysical shop in the area is like trying to start their own cult. Now, I'm not joking when I say that. We connect with a lot of other people in the areas, and a lot of the more new age light worker kinds of metaphysical shops in our area. And I don't think this is just in our area, but they're all actively trying to like build little cults. It's the weirdest thing. Like you go into these shops and like they either have like a particular member of their staff or an owner or a teacher, someone there that is like the next self-proclaimed messiah of blah blah blah, right? And and they're all actively trying to build like little cults. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand it. It's crazy. It's crazy. Anyway, so we see this reference of duality and yet also unity in Baphomet through their physical appearance. Physical representation is so key when we talk about Baphomet in spiritual practice and belief, because that is one of the reasons why people historically have been so afraid of Baphomet, and why it has been so easy to demonize Baphomet over the many centuries, because Baphomet as a spirit looks pretty fucking terrifying, right? But the physical representation of Baphomet is, if you think about it, what it really is it's just, again, a physical representation of extremes.
Well, it's also a
right?
conglomeration of just symbols.
As well. Exactly. And we're going to get into that. Okay. But so we see things like, you'll notice if you see a true depiction of Baphomet, and this is where whether or not you're dealing with a depiction of Baphomet, or whether or not you're dealing with, say, like a Golden Dawn depiction of like the goat of Mendes or something like that, is a Baphomet, a true depiction of Baphomet, will have both a phallus and breasts, feminized breasts. Okay. Baphomet will typically have both a penis, a representation of a penis or phallus, and breasts. Okay. If you're looking at a statue of Baphomet that has just a penis and no breasts, that's not a Baphomet. That's some other bullshit that somebody else created, right? Or dreamt up. Okay. So Baphomet has both feminine breasts and a phallus. Okay. Which is one of the other reasons why I think that Baphomet is, in again, more modern context, I think really a fairly good representation of what would be considered a non-binary spirit or intelligence. Physically, we have a lot of people now who are intersex. We have a lot of people now with it kind of like the trans spectrum, right? Where those different ideas around human body, what the physical anatomy is as it equates to masculine, feminine, right? So much of that is now like there's kind of a spectrum of that now, right? And Baphomet, I think, is a really popular spirit for a lot of people within the LGBTQIA plus community, because they kind of embody all of these things, right? And I think, to be honest, that's over the years who has really kind of kept a lot of Baphomet just going. Why we continue to see this figure pop up again and again is because Baphomet is always there to say, like, hey, everybody's welcome. Just because you might look like this doesn't mean that you are this, right? You're much more than this, right? And so, and I love that about Baphomet. Okay. But let's see, where was I? We've already gone over gender and sexuality and that stuff. So let's talk about the concept of balance, okay? Because balance, in really every sense of the word, balance is of utmost importance when we look at Baphomet as an intelligence, when we look at the philosophies behind what Baphomet represents and the beliefs, okay? And we really primarily, we see balance being referenced so much in the occult symbolism of Baphomet's body, okay? So let's go over those things now, okay? So Baphomet's head. An accurate depiction of Baphomet is almost always going to show Baphomet with a torch, like a scepter of some sort right here above the crown of his head, right? So we see the torch or the scepter, or the burning scepter, positioned at the crown of Baphomet's head as a sign, again, of illumination and gnosis. Okay. Deities, others like Hecate, right, that we talk about and love so much, right? She is often seen wielding a torch. Right. And that is why. It's because as a deity, as a goddess, she is all about enlightenment, like illumination and gnosis. They're huge components of her. Right. Baphomet is the same. Okay. And so we see that depicted along the crown of his head. Right. Okay. The horns that appear on Baphomet's head are a representation of the bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. Okay. That is a physical representation that Baphomet shares with other horned gods, in that those gods, whether they have horns, whether they have antlers, it doesn't matter what they may have, right? But that depiction of antlers or horns, what it is it's a bridge that connects the physical body of the god, right? To which is again going to be a representation of the physical world, the material world, and humanity, and the more bestial nature, the primal bestial nature of all that it is within our realm, right? Within the human realm, right? The antlers, though, as they reach up from the physical body, they then they are a representation of reaching up and reaching for spirit, is kind of the idea. So we see them as a bridge between the material, the human, the mundane, and the spiritual. Okay? So the horns coming off of Baphomet's head are this bridge. Okay? The goat head that really trips so many people up, right? The goat is a symbol of personal power. Baphomet is all about personal empowerment, okay, which is, again, one of the reasons why we love Baphomet so damn much. Is Baphomet is one of these spirits. It's like, you know what? this isn't even, at the end of the day, this isn't even really about me. It's about you and what you do for yourself and in your own life and how you take responsibility for your own power and how you use it, right? So the goat is a symbol of personal power, the ego, okay, and that could be ego in both a positive or negative manifestation, depending on who you are, right? And traditionally masculine forces of creation. Okay? Okay, the goat is also a symbol for the cycle of chaos and order that is found within nature. Wings. Baphomet is always depicted with wings. And when we say wings, we're talking like bird-like, like feathered angel, angelic kinds of wings that we would associate with angels, right? So the wings represent the connection to the heavens or to the spirit world once again, right? Okay, connecting to spirit, right? The wings are also symbolic of a spiritual concept known as the firmament, or in some spiritual traditions, the macrocosm. So wings, not just within the associations of Baphomet, but within other spirits where we see winged kinds of things. Again, even with angelic energies or angelic spirits, very often they are represented as winged. And the reason for that is that the expanse of the wings, what those are meant to represent, is the totality of existence, the universe, right? And the idea is like the measure, the span of the wings is a measure, or the wings, in a sense, as they kind of maybe curl, they kind of move in and around, and they encompass and they hold and they bring a sense of structure or shape to the firmament or all that is. So this is another indication of how Baphomet, though they often have this goat-like face and even hooves, which we'll get to in a moment, but they are also still a celestial being. Okay. The position of the arms, most people will notice Baphomet, right arm up, okay, left arm down, right, pointing, right. All right. And these fingers have really interesting associations. We're going to talk about these in a moment, okay? But this is position of the arms. The right arm is raised to the heavens, okay? And as another sign of connection to the spirit world, okay? But the right arm also reminds us to maintain a level of curiosity about our practice in the grand design of the universe, okay? This is about reaching up, looking beyond ourselves, or looking beyond what we commonly accept day to day, right? So the pointing to the heavens, right? There is more out there. There is more. Look to the stars. Look to ways to expand. Be curious. Okay, right? So the right arm bears an inscription of the word solve, S-O-L-V-E, solve. Okay, solve basically means to separate. Okay, to bring division or to separate. Okay. Or to be able to, a better way to put that, I guess, would actually be, a lot of people hear that and they think, well, you were just talking about how consciousness is unity and there is no separation, or we need to move past a point of separation. And while that is true, okay, it would be better, rather than, if you're looking at kind of a more spiritual definition for that means of separation with solve on that right arm, what this would probably be, or it would be better for you to look at this more as a way to identify the individual parts of the whole. Right? Because we can identify, or we can recognize that things can be separate and yet also still part of a whole, right?
It's a solvent.
Exactly. So it's the same root word in the Latin. Right?
Yeah.
Solvent,
so I mean, you
right?
have, just using an example, in like a perfume, you have a solvent, which is usually the perfumer's alcohol, and it helps blend and pull those separate notes together to function as one whole complete thing. But most of the time, you're still going to be able to pick out certain things.
The index fingers, I want to talk about that briefly because I mentioned that. Okay, or index fingers, the fingers on both hands, both your right for up, right, and your left for down, right? Okay, these two fingers are significant in the symbolization or the representation of Baphomet. These are also, what the hell, balloons? Is that a sign from Baphomet?
Yes.
Baphomet loves balloons.
And Baphomet is like, y'all on the right track.
Anyway, there's something that we must do. We do some sort of hand sign or something that must trigger those things. I don't know why. Anyway, these fingers, this is also something that you will see, I think, popping up in Christianity and Catholicism. And this right here, these two fingers, what this is a nod once again to divine masculine energies. Okay, your index finger is the alignment of Jupiter, the planet Jupiter. Okay, and your middle finger is the alignment of Saturn. Okay. These fingers or excuse me, these planetary representations, okay, both Jupiter and Saturn are seen in many metaphysical or occult traditions. They are seen as the divine judges of our solar system, right? Think of these two as like representations of dad, basically, right? Something about two fingers, like I'm doing a peace. Maybe that's it. It's a peace sign or victory. Victory, balloons, celebrate. Okay, I'm gonna quit doing this now because the balloons are starting to piss me off. Okay, your index finger, Jupiter as a divine judge, as a divine or celestial papa kind of an energy, right? Father figure kind of energy. Jupiter is benefic. He's positive and he's generous. He is the dad that gives you everything you want and is always there to help you. Okay. Saturn, right? Your ring finger or your middle finger. Saturn is malefic and he is strict and limiting. Okay. He is not the bad dad, right? But he is the disciplinarian. He's the one that is all about like setting limits, knowing your limits, looking very carefully at your boundaries and your responsibilities, right? So we need the balance of those two. But these two fingers, as they move up, this is what this is. And even as these appear in Christianity, these are representations of that divine masculine essence, that divine masculine nature that even the Christians adhere to, the clergy in Christian churches adhere to or align to their deity, their God, who is a divine masculine presence, right? So that's why the fingers, okay? Right. The other arm, left arm down, right? Okay. So the left arm, oh, I lost my space, points to the earth and is a sign of connection to the physical world and a reminder to us of the importance of our primal animalistic nature. Okay? Because while we are divine and celestial beings, we are also still meat sacks. We are still intelligent animals. And that's an important part of our being. There are a lot of people out there that have this agenda around like, oh, well, we need to move beyond our basic selves. We need to look beyond who we are as mortal, animalistic creatures. That's bullshit. You need to honor those parts of who you are just as much as your higher self. All the time that people spend seeking high vibrations and focusing on the spiritual, those people ultimately run into trouble in their physical lives. They become ungrounded. So we need to honor, again, with Baphomet in mind, we need to honor those extremes within ourselves equally. Your animalistic self, your basic physical being, your primal component is just as significant, just as important as any other aspect of your being. Okay. Baphomet tells us as much. Okay. So we are, let's see. Yes, we are both divine animal. Yes, we are both the divine and animal. And when we forget this, we create imbalance in ourselves and our world. I think I already kind of established that. The left arm bears the word coagula. So we have solve to the right and coagula to the left, right? And again, these two words are also representations of Baphomet being a figure who is all about unity and taking extremes or ideas that with our limited human brains we associate with dualities or opposites and showing us that no, indeed, these things are really in essence just part of each other. So solve is to separate, coagula is to bring together, to coagulate, right? So good old Latin words, right? Okay, so we can separate and focus on the separation, the importance of individual pieces, right? Individual identities, these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, we also need to remember that we're all in this together, right? And we need to work to bring those separate pieces back to a state of wholeness within ourselves, within our community, within our world, within all that is. Okay? Right? So the breasts. Okay? Breasts. I got a nice pair going myself, actually. I should have done this topless. I have a very Baphomet-like body, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. He's a little thinner than I am, though. He works out. They work out? I don't know. Breasts are always a symbol for divine femininity and motherhood. Obvious reasons, right? Okay, as a part of Baphomet, breasts represent the ways that we can be nourished through processes of learning and spiritual growth. Okay, the breasts are a means of feeding infants. And because of this, they are a perfect representation of the transfer of information from a divine source to humanity, right? We see that, right? The idea that like, oh, well, breastfeeding is an exchange of energy an exchange of nourishment, an exchange of, well, whatever you want to call it, right? From the primary source to the secondary source, right? That we see. So that is a representation, once again, of our connection to divinity and the exchange of divine power that we all have access to, that we are all also a part of, right? And the way that our spirits, our gods, our goddesses are able to nourish us, to give us a little piece of themselves as we grow and learn spiritually, right? So a transfer of information from a divine source to humanity, or maybe perhaps the exchange from a teacher to a student, right? As it would maybe be another parallel or another comparison. The feminine breasts, as they appear on a male torso, are also meant to show us that everything we see is not always as it seems, right? This indication to look beneath the surface to truly identify the nature of something is one of the more heretical parts of Baphomet, based on texts coming from the scholars of the church. And the scholars did absolutely consider people who worked with spirits like Baphomet heretics. Baphomet was a heretical intelligence, a heretical spirit. But heretics, really what that means, in essence, is that you have just found the power within yourself and you have connected to a source of spiritual inspiration outside of what the supposed spiritual authority is. That's all that means. To be a heretic means that you think for yourself, that you buck the system, not for no damn reason. You buck the system because you can see that the system is fucked up. And there is greater value for you in an individual path. Okay, so that parallel there between the feminine, the masculine body, right, that we see with the remainder of the torso, right, has a lot to do with that. Like, again, it's a sign like you need to dig deeper. You need to not take things on the surface. Don't be superficial with your belief or your experience of yourself, the world. Look, dig deeper, right? Okay, so, and the church hates that, right? The church hates it when we actually think for ourselves and dig a little bit deeper, right? Because then that robs them of power, right? All right, the scales. Baphomet has scales, I believe, on his, well, I've seen a couple different depictions where Baphomet has scales on both his shoulders and his legs, upper legs. The scales that more commonly, I think, appear on Baphomet's upper legs, okay? Elemental associations. And a lot of these already should be clear, right? I haven't really talked a lot about that, but if you think about the other physical representations, the torch, fire, right? Always an association with gnosis and illumination, right? The wings, air, heaven, right? Air, the energy of air, the element of air, right? The scales, okay, are the elemental associations of water. Scales on the lower torso and the thighs, the element of water. Water is another powerful symbol of spirit and the concept of divine primal chaos. Kind of the idea, when we talk about divine primal chaos, what that really is it's kind of the idea of like the maelstrom, right? The maelstrom, or like the void, right? Which is chaotic in the sense that there's a lot of energy moving very rapidly through there, but that energy is not always destructive in nature. That energy is not about destruction. It's about processes of creation that do sometimes have to involve destruction, because sometimes we have to tear everything down to be able to rebuild something new, right? Or to create something new. So the scales are a representation of water, which has strong associations to spirit, but also divine primal chaos, right? Water is the balance between air and earth. Water is also where life begins. Okay? Again, potential, creation. The disc. Baphomet is very often seen holding a disc, and it's kind of interesting when you see depictions of Baphomet, because I mentioned Baphomet has a phallus, right? And I keep saying phallus because while Baphomet is seen to have a penis, it doesn't really look like a penis.
Yeah.
In a lot of depictions, it looks almost more like a caduceus, or like the symbol for like of the snakes wrapping around the staff, right? That we associate
Hermetic, yeah.
Hermes, yeah, Hermetic practices, Asclepius, the old god Asclepius, right? Associations with healing primarily. But behind that, behind the representation of Baphomet's phallus or penis, there is usually a disc that is being held against his stomach by his penis. It's like just kind of wedged in there, right? It's interesting. But the disc, in traditional depictions of Baphomet, the disc is, it represents the ancient tablets. Typically, the disc is a representation of, first of all, it's got a strong solar representation. But But beyond that, and it's not just about the sun. Beyond that, it has a lot to do with the idea of ancient tablets or old documents that record the spiritual legacies of humanity, basically, like the idea of these old texts or these old whatever, right? I think like in Hermeticism, you see like a concept of like the emerald tablet, right? You know, and the disc is not the emerald tablet, but it would be comparable to something like that. Okay. So, but if we look deeper, the disc is similar to the representation of the horns, as the disc is also seen as a bridge between the intangible, etheric realm of thought and the corporeal world, the corporeal solid realm of the body. Okay. The disc is also a representation of how we see in many spiritual traditions the transmutation of physical into spirit, and in reverse, spirit into physical. So your disc is there basically, it's Baphomet, again, a kind of another representation saying like, learn, study, grow, have a respect for knowledge, you know, be wise, you know, listen to the stories of the ancestors, listen to the spirits of old, right? You're writing your own stories, certainly, but your stories wouldn't have been possible without all of these others, right? So the disc is a representation again of lineage spiritually for all of us that goes back countless millennia, right? The phallus, because I haven't talked about that enough, right? Okay. Some will recognize the symbol I we just mentioned of the caduceus, right? And again, it's more commonly associated with gods like Asclepius, okay? But if you're familiar with it, you'll know that it represents the disciplines of healing. Okay, its meaning is the same for Baphomet. Healing happens when we can come to accept the different parts of our being, and we can find balance. Okay, so the phallic shape of the staff of the caduceus serves as the balancing representation to the breasts. Okay, the phallus or penis is another symbol of the divine masculine forces of creation. The crossed legs. Oh God, this just keeps going. I'm so sorry, everybody. Okay, but there's a lot of information here. Okay, and you need to know this if you're going to work with Baphomet. Okay, all right. The crossed legs. One of the other abstract indications of Baphomet is very often Baphomet is seen depicted with crossed legs. Okay, the abstract indication of unifying energies, right, and the tonic aspect of some spiritual practices. Okay, we kneel or sit closer to the ground to maintain connection to the strength and foundation of the physical world. And that is the crossed legs, a representation. Okay? It is almost as if we were, you know, like we're in meditation, right? Like you sit down, you're grounding yourself, you're preparing to center yourself for work, right? And we're all in crisscross applesauce position, right? Okay, so but it is, again, it's a representation not only of that, those tonic grounding influences and our connection to the earth, but also the intersection, the cross of those legs is, again, a representation of unity, bringing two things together, right? Okay, it's a good way not to get pregnant. Okay, the cloven hooves, okay, which the Christians, between the goat head and the hooves, the Christians love to talk shit about how satanic Baphomet is. They completely overlook the big angelic wings. Like, what? How'd you miss the wings? Right? Anyway, but the hooves, these hooves symbolize our animalistic nature. Once again, a nod to our animalistic nature and the physical world. The cleft in the hooves, cloven hooves, creates 2 points on the hoof, 2 points or 2 channels of power, which is another nod to duality and unification. 2 hooves, 2 cloven representations moving up into 1 foot. Separation into unity. Okay. Trying to do it. Oh God, this is reminding me of that stupid thing that kids used to do where they would like put their hands together and I'd be like, it looks like a vagina. It's like, no, clearly you've never seen a vagina. That looks nothing like a vagina. Do you ever have like idiot friends on the playground do that?
No, I didn't have friends.
You ever had little boyfriends?
No.
I don't mean boyfriends. I mean like little friends that were boys.
No, I didn't have friends.
Oh God, I remember like in elementary school, like this douchey kid came up to me and he's like, hey, do this with your hands. Or wait, he had me do this. And then he like put his fingers in like that. And then he like opened his hands and he's like, oh, it looks like a vagina. Well, he didn't say vagina, right? And I was like, what just happened? Was I assaulted? What was this? You know, it was the weirdest thing. Yes, and I think back on that. I don't know why I went down on this tangent. It just reminded me of like cloven hooves. Anyway, sorry y'all. It's late. I'm tired. And stupid. Okay, the globe. Baphomet is very often or more commonly depicted sitting on a globe. Right. And when I say globe, I mean like Earth. Okay. Um, Baphomet sits on top of a globe or depiction of our world. Okay. And this is meant to show us that our evolution as both physical human beings and souls gives us positions of mastery. Okay. We move beyond the limits of base thought and human society to embrace the divine within ourselves, or we should. Okay. We do this while maintaining our humanity and connection to the world that we inhabit. Okay, so Baphomet sitting on the globe is a representation of how we are as humans. We have been given mastery over our physical world. And I want to be really clear on that, okay, because people hear that. And if they're fucked up in some way about their spiritual belief, if they've bought into the patriarchy in any kind of sense, fuck the patriarchy, right? When I say mastery of our world, that does not mean that you are the master of our fucking planet. That means that we all have a moral, a physical, a spiritual responsibility to fucking take care of this planet. That we are masters, but more likely we are better put, we are stewards of our planet, and we need to value Earth. We need to put our value in Earth as much as we focus on spiritual ascension and heaven and whatever the hell else those other bullshit ideas may be. We need to start respecting our fucking planet, because if the planet goes, where the fuck does that leave us, right? The planet is also an inherent part of who we are spiritually. When the planet is suffering, we suffer. That's one of the reasons the world is so fucked up right now, is because we have poisoned our planet. And I'm not just talking about pollution. I'm talking on a spiritual level. We have poisoned our planet. And that is in turn affecting us, because we are all connected. Again, remember, no real separation. We are all fucking connected. Sorry, there's my tangent. There's my soapbox moment for this episode. Okay, so anyway, so he sits on a globe because he's telling us, like, you've been given this powerful thing. You've been given this amazing gift, and this world is there. It sustains you. Take care of it. Be responsible. Fuck all those major corporations for all their pollution. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about gnosis. Okay, so gnosis, that's the anatomy of Baphomet. Okay, that's pretty much it. Those are the things you need to know, right? Gnosis. So what is it? Okay, gnosis is conscious knowledge of the mysteries of all that is. Okay, gnosis is a process that happens in a dual mirrored way. It must happen both within us and externally. And we are part of a collective experience as souls. This means on some level, we carry the knowledge of all that is within us. Not consciously necessarily, but that's a moment of gnosis. A moment of gnosis occurs when we have, again, just a moment where we become consciously aware of something much bigger than what we were aware of, right? So we draw upon the knowledge and experience shared by countless other living beings because of the connection that we share spiritually. Does this mean that we know or can know everything? Absolutely not. None of us are ever capable of that. Okay, not in this lifetime, not in this form. Okay. Okay, but we are limited. I think we talked about this in the podcast before, that we are limited, I think, in our understanding of things like all that is. We talk about all that is, or the mystery of the universe, right? Just all that. We are limited in our ability to understand these things by the reality of our humanity. Okay, and what that means in essence is that as mortal beings, we are buffered from so much else that goes on around us that we are not when we are existing on a purely spiritual level, right? Or soul level, right? So when an external experience teaches us something, it awakens some part of us that already held that knowledge. That is a moment of gnosis. It really isn't. It is a new experience, but it's an experience that speaks to something that we already carried within. It reminds us, like, well, you're already aware of this. You've already experienced this. You already carried this within you. And it wasn't conscious before, but it is now, even just temporarily. That is a moment of gnosis. In that Gnostic moment, that information becomes part of us. Following this, we see the world around us changed. by new behavior structured by an expanded state of awareness. That's within us. Those of you who have had moments of gnosis, you might refer to them as maybe like an epiphany, an aha moment, right? A lightning bolt moment, right? When you have moments like that, even though they might be very temporary, after that, you're never the same. You will make decisions in your life after that with a very different perspective, a broadened perspective. Okay, it's a good thing. That's enlightenment in action. Enlightenment is not a one and done kind of thing. Enlightenment is a process. It takes lifetimes, and it is something that cannot be achieved in human form. Not for most of us anyway. Okay. The outer and inner worlds work together, okay, to help us to learn and grow. Okay, and the experience that we have of this is gnosis. Okay. All right, let's see. It, to be honest, for the relevant information on Baphomet. So I feel like I shouted and I lectured and I talked a whole lot about Baphomet and the significances of Baphomet. But again, I want to go back to what I said a while back, where your experience, your work, your understanding, and how Baphomet ultimately fits into your spiritual practice is entirely up to you. It has to be. They are not one of these kinds of spirits that are about trying to build a church where everybody thinks the same, worships the same, looks the same. That is definitely very counter to Baphomet energy. So learn what you can. Watch this episode, listen to what I had to say, run that through your own filter, right? And if it works for you, wonderful. If not, keep looking. But be very careful around the sources of information, because if they have anything to do with Christianity, they're full of shit. Totally biased. Okay, if they have anything to do with the Satanic Temple, they don't even believe in Baphomet. Like they don't believe in anything. They're atheists, the majority of them anyway, right? Which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to crap on the Satanic Temple, right? But they're definitely not a reliable resource for anything on Baphomet. And be very wary of goetic practitioners, left-hand craft practitioners, and occult edgelords who are trying to give you information or talking about Baphomet, because half the time they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And the information that they're giving you is going to be based off of the same old satanic bullshit that the Christian church is working with. Okay? Just you owe yourself better. You owe yourself, you owe it to yourself to be very careful about where you get your information. That includes from us, right? Be suspicious, be skeptical. We are always right. And we do always bring you good information. But I'm biased, right? It's in my agenda as someone who wants to be honest and help educate you to bring you good information, right? Anyway, that's all I have to say about Baphomet.
I think that's the podcast.
I've gone on long enough.
It's been a long day, and it's been a good day.
Yeah, but it has been a long day.
It's been a long day. I will say I got called out by my cards earlier.
Yeah.
I used to try to pull a couple of cards for myself.
Sorry, I have this hang now.
And I was told that I needed to get the fuck over my weird thing with Malachite and to work with it.
Oh.
So I'm working with Malachite, and it's cool. Here we are. So
I think it's good.
Anyway, have a good evening, have a good morning, have a good whatever you're listening to and or watching this.
Yes, thank you.
Send us your questions, let us know, and we'll be back in
real quick before you set up. So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. So our next episode, we'll have Jasper back on the podcast. Jasper has been on the podcast. I think this will be their fourth time now.
Third or fourth, yeah.
Anyway, it is Pride Month, at least in our area of the world. And so we're going to have Jasper on that episode, and we are going to be kind of reconnecting, rediscussing, or kind of touching back on the topic of witchcraft and these kinds of alternative belief systems and LGBTQIA plus identity. I think it's timely. No, not happy about that.
I just feel like we're doing a repeat episode, but that's fine.
Well, I think it's a good topic to revisit, because those things are kind of always evolving.
Yeah.
It's been like,
I'm just tired.
It's been a couple years since we talked about that last, and so I guess what I'm saying is, for those of you who are here and down for it, that's going to be our big gay episode for the year. For those of you who are not LGBTQIA plus, or allies, you might want to maybe skip that episode. But I'm also going to say, if you're not LGBTQIA plus or at least an ally, why the fuck are you listening to our podcast?
Yeah,
Like, we are as gay as springtime.
it's true.
Anyway, that's all I got to say. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
That was also very gay.